It is really ridiculous that the free democratic world could sit back and watch Putin make a armed aggression across an international boundary, as he has done over Ukraine, when we have got the capacity financially, undoubtedly, to make it possible for the Ukrainians to continue to resist Putin's armed.
The Foreign Secretary, Lord Cameron, is in Washington as he continues his efforts to persuade Republicans in Congress to release $60 billion of military aid for Ukraine. On his way there, he met Donald Trump at his Mar-a-Lago base in Florida. But he gave few details of their talks, which he described as private. He's failed to get a meeting with Mike Johnson, Speaker of the House of Representatives, and a Trump ally who is a key figure in blocking a vote on the issue. Well, at a news conference with the US Secretary of State Antony Blinken, Lord Cameron stressed he was not interfering in US politics on the issue.
I come here with no intention to lecture anybody or tell anybody what to do or get in the way of the process of politics and other things in the United States. I just come here as a great friend and believer in this country, and a believer that it's profoundly in your interests and your security and your future and the future of all your partners to release this money and let it through. And I'm looking forward to meetings I'm going to be having in Congress later today. And above all, we know what's right for us. We know that it is right to stop Putin's aggression. We know it's right for our own militaries and our own production bases to ramp up production, not just for Ukraine, but for our own stocks. And as Tony said, so many of the jobs created will be jobs created here in the United States, and indeed, when we're dealing with our own weapon systems, jobs in the UK.
Well, the Foreign Secretary was also pressed on whether the UK would suspend arms sales to Israel after the attack on an aid convoy in which 7 people were killed.
The latest assessment leaves our position on export licences unchanged. This is consistent with the advice that I and other ministers have received, and as ever, we will keep the position under review. Let me be clear, though, we continue to have grave concerns around the humanitarian access issue in Gaza, both for the period that was assessed and subsequently. We've seen a welcome increase in trucks with, as Tony said, perhaps as many as 400 going in yesterday, the highest since October the 7th, and of course public commitments from Israel to flood Gaza with aid. These now need to be turned into reality.
Well, let's speak to the former Foreign Secretary, Lord Owen. Good evening, Lord Owen.
Good evening.
Good to have you with us. Let me ask you first of all about what we heard from David Cameron there, that the assessment on whether the UK should be supplying arms to Israel has not changed at the moment. Thus, the UK is going to continue doing so, despite some pressure to stop doing that, to stop sending arms to Israel. What do you make of what he had to say there?
I think that is obviously the facts. I mean, is there a legal reason why we should stop it? And all he's saying is, as yet, no. And I think you've got to be guided by rules on this. Arms sales to friendly countries can't be just disrupted on a mere whim and a political convenience. But we are all abide by the law. Arms sales are subject to quite tough laws. And I think the Foreign Secretary was right to raise the issue and to warn Israel that we might have to do this if there was a legal finding, but the legal finding is such that it doesn't need to be done. And I'm glad that's the case. Israel is a friend and ally, and I think one's got to be very careful about stopping munitions, particularly actually since they're very small. I mean, it would be a political gesture to do it, but I think it would be a political gesture that would carry for quite a long time across party views amongst not just Israelis, but other people as well.
Do you think that Lord Cameron should do, as Labour is pushing him to do, which is to publish that legal advice so that people can see why we're continuing to supply arms, despite, as he himself said, the grave concerns about the extent of humanitarian supplies that are being allowed in?
No, I don't think you should. I think that's for the advice of government, and some things are better left not said. And as I say, it would be a very difficult decision to break of friendship has existed ever since the State of Israel was created. And in my view, it would be not the right way to handle Israel. I say that as somebody who was the first foreign secretary ever to visit Israel, right, strangely enough.
Well, let me ask you about the other main purpose of Lord Cameron's visit, which is to try to persuade Republicans to lift their block on more aid to Ukraine, that big $60 billion package that's been held up for months now. Do you think all those words are going to make much difference?
I hope they do. I do think it's important enough for him to fly the Atlantic and to make those representations. I think the situation is grave and getting worse in Ukraine, and we do need to have that democratic decision made by the Biden government carried through Congress and delivered to Ukraine. And if it cannot be done, then we'll in Europe will have to look again at making more contributions to fill the gap. It is really ridiculous that the free democratic world could sit back and watch Putin make a armed aggression across an international boundary, as he has done over Ukraine, when we have got the capacity financially, undoubtedly, to make it possible for the Ukrainians to continue to resist Putin's armed forces. And remember, the Ukraine have done fantastically well. Some people predicted that the Russians would be in the capital celebrating within 2 days. In fact, their army arrived into the war with ceremonial uniform in their baggage, fully expecting to have a ceremonial takeover of the capital, Kiev. And it's therefore a very, very important issue, this. And Cameron was quite right to go to the United States and make this appeal.
And he's been meeting Donald Trump, the former and quite possibly future president of the United States. I'm sure we'd all love to have been a fly on the wall at that meeting. He didn't give much away, but how do you see the relationship between these two? Because, of course, they did clash when David Cameron was Prime Minister, but he comes at it with quite a bit of clout as a former Prime Minister, and Donald Trump could be the key figure in this.
Yes, I think it was, again, the right decision to go and talk to former President Trump. And I think we don't want to interfere with their election campaign. It's not really fully underway at the moment. I think if it was closer to the actual election, it would be difficult to go. But I think that and I'm sure it was basically passed through the Biden government. We're not in the business of making enemies of Biden government. Biden government want this to be done, and they're happy to it to be done. I also think it was pretty sensible for it to be private. Of course, how much leaks out, knowing Trump, something will leak out. But he has to square people in his party and with his supported element within the party before it can be done, because it's been held up by an individual who has got the right to not put issues before the congressional committee.
Yeah.
And he has to obviously protect him and probably take the flak himself and say, I've listened to the case. I think in this rare circumstances we should let this one run and let it go through. But I'm not very optimistic that that's what's likely to happen. I think Trump, when he takes positions, usually sticks with them for an hour.
For at least an hour or so before he changes his mind. It's been great to speak to you. Lord Owen, thanks so much for joining us.
Pleasure.
You're